ZKSync introduces the ZK token, probably one of the more anticipated networks to dropped their token. So here are some of the details. 21 billion in supply. It is being priced on the pre-market on perpetuals markets at $36, which is coming in at, I think, at like an $8 billion network. So pretty hefty. Of course, ZKSync has been one of the oldest brands alongside Ethereum that I can remember. I remember donating for Gitcoin grants, probably actually to one of your Gitcoin grants, Anthony, back in 2019 using ZKSync Lite. I'm sure used it plenty of times as well because I know you're a big fan of Gitcoin. In the airdrop, 17.5% of the total supply was airdropped in a one-time airdrop. So many other teams, layer 2s networks have done seasons. ZKSync is not doing a season. They just dropped 17.5% all at once to almost 700,000 wallets. So of that 17.5%, 89% went to users with on-chain activity, who became eligible for the ZKSync airdrop. 11% went to contributors. So this is like developers, researchers, educators, like off-chain activity that was rewarded with an airdrop. Just want to emphasize 17.5% to 700,000 wallets is like pretty crazy. I think Arbitrum did, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. The Eigenlayer did 5% with another 5% slated for later. Like industry standard has like somehow like converge on like 10% plus or minus a few percentage points. 17.5%, like correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but that's like the largest airdrop in terms of supply that I can remember.
Yeah, no, it's the same for me as well. Like it is definitely the largest airdrop in quite a while. I don't remember which ones, in terms of major projects, which ones were larger. I think, as you said, the trend seems to have been it gets smaller and smaller or gets broken up into seasons. And I've been a big advocate of not just like bigger airdrops, but like bigger community distribution. And I think that with ZKSync, the community contribution came out to around 67%, I believe, with team and investors, getting about 33-ish%, which is much better than what the industry standard has been up until now. I think the industry standard tend to have been 50-50 split, where a lot of that would go to a treasury instead of to the users from day one, which I think is actually detrimental to a token, because what ends up happening is that tokens open up at a pretty high fully diluted value. Maybe there's only 5% of the tokens circulating, and then the market has to price in another 95% or up to 95% of tokens coming out over the next few years, which has been a trend that I hope to see reversed in the coming future. I mean, I'm personally trying to be the change I want to see in the world and talking to projects about this and trying to get them to come over to my belief that, have a large float, have a big float from day one on the market, so you can have actual price discovery on this stuff. But ZKSync definitely is pioneering it here, which is really great to see. I mean, as I said, 17.5%, seems to be the largest in quite a while.
Yeah, so just to really put some numbers in here, investors of ZKSync will own a supply of 17.2% versus the 17.5% that's airdropped to the community that is airdropped. And then the team will own 16.1%. So the airdrop supply is larger than both investors and the team. And overall, so they have this like pie chart that we're looking at where there's also a supply of a token assembly. I kind of think that means like it's like a foundation of sorts is like what people would think. And then ecosystem initiatives, which I think is incentivization campaigns for the future. So they're classifying these two things in the community section, which comes out to 2/3 of the total token supply allocated to the community, both past, present, and future. And then 1/3 is allocated to the team and investors. It is pretty nice to see like the airdrop larger than investors and teams. It's like part of the ethos of crypto. It's kind of hard to follow through on. It's hard to convince projects to follow through on. Also, like it's just not in VC interest either. But ZKSync just showing the way and carving a path. I think that's pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah. I think there might be a little bit of a caveat to that generally, not just applying to ZKSync, but just generally in that in the investor kind of pool of entities in there is quite small relative to the kind of airdrop pool. So for example, you might have like maybe a couple of hundred individuals that make up all of the investors, whether they be angels or VCs, and then they have different percentages of the supply. There's usually a lead VC in rounds that take a huge chunk of the supply. So they may have, a huge chunk there, and then you've got got the airdrop going to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals. So it's a bit different like that. But it's hard to plan for that. Like even if you were to do an ICO, one whale can come along and just buy up so much of the supply, right? So the only way to actually get proper distribution is have years worth of price discovery through multiple cycles, like how ETH had, like how BTC had, to actually get good distribution. You can't plan for it. It's very, very difficult because there's always the whales that are around, whether you do an ICO or do it as a private investment rounds. And even if you try to get around that, it's difficult, very, very difficult, because there's no on-chain identity yet, right? There's no one uses on-chain identity products to try and do Sybil resistance and stuff like that. So essentially you have this game of trying to balance things, but no one's gotten it right so far. But I feel like ZKSync has done pretty well on the distribution side of things.
Yeah, one more caveat about the 17.5% airdrop. ZKSync users got 89% of the 17.5%, and then 5.8% of the 17.5% was sent straight to like native applications on ZKSync, which were then like given the mandate to do what you see fit with these tokens, like use it for incentivizations, further airdrops to your community members. And so they did the kind of the model where, like, in addition to airdropping to their own users, they also airdrop to projects with a mandate to drop to their own users. Okay, so let's unpack how people actually got eligible for the ZKSync airdrop, because this is where a lot of the tension over the airdrop was felt. You needed to accrue 1 point, and there were 6-7 different ways to accrue a point, and you just needed to have 1 point in order to be eligible for the ZKSync airdrop. You need to have interacted with 10 contracts on ZKSync Era, or deposited liquidity into DeFi protocols, or used one of the account abstraction paymaster accounts on ZKSync Era, or traded 10 ERC20 tokens, or held one of the native ZKSync Era NFTs, or on the ZKSync Lite network, donated to a Gitcoin round, or at least transacted 3 different times. If you did one of those things, you became eligible. And then there were further activities that you would have earned to have add on a multiplier onto your eligibility. If you read the blog post, which I highly encourage people to, if they want to learn more, the ZKSync team shared some of the philosophy of how they wanted to drop their token. Obviously, it's pretty well known that ZKSync is one of the most botted networks, like Sybil networks out there, because they have been, from the earliest of days, very explicit about the existence of their token. Like the founders and the team said, like, yeah, there will be a token. That's how you decentralize a network. We're not going to hide that. As a result, that kind of like was the magnet towards a bunch of like sibling activity. And so in their blog post, they talked about how they wanted to identify and reward people on a human first approach. So they tried to identify human-like behaviors, such as like using smart contracts very early in their existence rather than trying to like hide amongst the crowd. They say humans tend to be risk on. And other like criteria just to like try and parse out what is a human. After they developed the criteria that would reward humanness, then ZKSync added on a pretty light-handed sibling filter as well. So not trying to just filter out every single Sybil, but just like admittingly letting some Sybils in, because they still nonetheless overemphasize rewarding human behavior. Just a very light Sybil filter on the end of things, just to like kind of pull out the most egregious ones. And so that was their like philosophy. If you go onto Twitter, you will see a ton of discussion about all of these things. And like Signal is like being thrown all over the place. You can only imagine that if there are Sybil accounts and Sybil farms, they also know how to Sybil Twitter too. And so deriving noise, which is something that we do at Bankless because we cover these things. Like we generally have teams on for live streams. We definitely cover the token drops. Like getting people's feedback is always very difficult because people are just shouting left and right. That you don't have a lot of time to capture feedback. Overall, like maybe I have my thoughts and sentiments, Anthony. Maybe I'll ask you about yours first. Like overall, like what are your thoughts about like the feedback about this token drop?
I mean, I think my general thoughts about airdrops like just generally, not just specific to ZKSync, is that they are all heavily farmed, right? And they are all heavily botted. And it's not just on chain, it's also on Twitter, because Twitter's done nothing to curb the usage of bots. They are absolutely rampant on there. And it's naive for people to think that people aren't taking advantage of this to steer sentiment for certain reasons, right? Like we saw this play out with Starknet doing their airdrop. There was just a massive amount of hate because the Sybils didn't get what they what they wanted. So essentially what they do is if they're already part of a massive kind of operation running many different addresses to try and Sybil to get more money, they'll go on social media, they'll start flooding the project, and then they hope that the project caves and changes the distribution to give them more. And this has happened a few times with other projects. And I think if you do the math on it, this is not small change we're talking about. I saw something on Twitter that there was one entity tied to 65,000 addresses. Now, if you are controlling those 65,000 addresses, you're obviously going to be, smart enough to go on Twitter, get a bunch of bots spun up, and then try and steer sentiment so that you can get the team to actually reward you. Because if the team then says, okay, well, we're just going to give every address that ever used our protocol even $100 worth of tokens, if you own 65,000 addresses, that's $6.5 million, right? So just putting the math on this for people to understand the gravity and the incentives here. And when you follow the incentives, that's what you get to. And the bot activity is very, very obvious. As much as they try to act like they're not bots, it's extremely obvious which ones are bots and which ones aren't. And now with AI taking off as well, they may try to hide themselves a bit better, but it's still very, very obvious. And I've been watching you tweet about this and seeing all the replies to your tweets. And I actually, before likes were private, I went through the likes and I looked at the accounts. 90% of them were bot accounts or hacked accounts, because a lot of them will say joined 2015, but they're hacked accounts. They're accounts that have not been, that don't belong to the original owner, and they've got no mutual follows with me at all. They're just retweeting everything got to do with like airdrops generally. So it's just very, very obvious once you go into it. But now that likes are private, you can't even do that anymore. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess.
The tweet that I'm showing on screen is a reply to a tweet that I said, I'm collecting feedback on the ZKSync ZK token drop. Please let me know your thoughts. And also, if you're in the Bankless Discord, you can at me in the Airdrop Hunter channel directly too. And this was the most liked tweet in response to my tweet. And the response about like what the changes ought to be would be reduce the allocation for the team. Lower the highest max allocation from 100,000 down to 25,000 to 30,000. Allocate more tokens according to their fees spent, their active days and weeks and months, their paymaster, which is a contract, native bridge volume, and then light transactions. Give allocation to the minimum 1 million to 1.4 million wallets, and then there multipliers for old active wallets. Basically, every one of these suggestions is take away tokens from the fat tail and give it to the long tail. And this tweet happens to have like an insane amount of like 1.2 thousand retweets, like 2.5 thousand likes. And if you just go down to the comments, it's just like, it's just incomplete. And so it's hard to parse out signal and noise, because I will also go into the Bankless Discord, and I don't want to say that like this particular token drop was like unrelentingly like beloved by everyone. Everyone has problems with the token drop, but if you go into the Bankless Discord, there's like problems. People will say like, hey, I think I should have gotten allocation for my wallet that used like Argent or ZKSync Lite, but I didn't, and I'm disappointed by that. There will people say like, I'm very happy with this airdrop, is good for me. And then there were people who say like, look at these bot farms, I'm upset by this. But like the feedback and conversation in there is like coherent, and like everyone has a different opinion, and then you go onto Twitter and everyone has the same opinion, and it's just like give allocation from the fat tail and give it to the long tail, which is just like, to my opinion, like if that's just like, oh, you want Sybil to be rewarded. That's kind of like my take.
Exactly, and it can't be more obvious. I don't understand why people like like it can't be more obvious. If you want to reward the long tail, right, and you know that there's lots of Sybils there because we have on-chain proof of this, it's very obvious. Then what do you think's happening here? And as I said, once you put the math to it, this is not small numbers. This is very much worth someone's time to go out there and steer sentiment if they can get the team to cave and reward them for it. Because then they just go off and they've made a lot of money for very little effort, because it's just bots that they're running that are very readily available. And there are probably like teams that do this, like teams of people where it's become 100%. Like industrialized for them to do this because the payout is so large. So I don't know anyone is even doubting that this happens given what we've seen in crypto anyway, like outside of this. The incentives are there to do this.
Yeah, it's totally rational. Even ZKSync is making like tweets. Here's a tweet that they made in response. Meanwhile, something important you need to know: there is a massive coordinated Sybil misinformation campaign against ZKSync on X run by thousands of bots. And so like they're not even like saying like, hey, we'll try and like get feedback. They're just going full frontals, like declining the legitimacy of like a lot of these requests. I'm out here at Edge City Esmeralda, which is like a pop-up city, kind of like Suzalo. And there's a couple of ZKSync members here, and just like the ZKSync team's like working like, 24/7, just like trying to gather data, trying to gather information. And then they put out a tweet today and said like, we believe in our choices. We're gonna keep with the path. We're not gonna change anything. And like maybe they could have had enough data to like be more precise about the distribution of their tokens, but like the DDoS attack that is like a Sybil attack just like robs them of that opportunity. That's what I have been on the receiving end of many like Twitter mobs. It feels like a DDoS attack on your brain. Like it's impossible to parse like signal from noise. To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.